Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on how to write a discussion board post for your history class. I'm one of your Exploring History Learning Community facilitators, Natalie Sweet, and I'll guide you through this webinar today. As you work on your discussion board post this week, you may wonder what your instructor is looking for. Today, I'm going to let you see what an exemplary post looks like. Let's talk about what should be inside of it. First, you want to make certain that your discussion board post includes an answer that responds directly to the prompt that's given each week. Don't go off topic. Don't talk about another topic that you may have read about in your e-materials or textbook and that you would prefer to talk about. You want to make certain that you respond directly to the prompt that your instructor provides and that you respond to all parts of that prompt too, since there may be more than one element in the presented question. We also want to make certain that your response is at least 1 to 2 paragraphs in length. Tonight, you'll see that exemplary posts can sometimes go beyond that marker. You want to include specific examples that demonstrate your understanding of the material. Remember, that's what your instructor is looking for in these responses. They want to see that you have learned this material and that you can demonstrate your knowledge of that material. So, in your original posts, don't assume that your readers, being your instructor or your classmates, are going to make leaps in understanding between your points. You want to provide enough detail and examples to help them get the point. And finally, you want to make certain that your discussion board post includes proper references and citations. Here's a hint for all discussion board posts in any history class. Your initial post will almost always include citations and references. That's because you're going to rely on the readings that you have been assigned to inform your post. At the end of the day, you want to demonstrate to your audience where you pulled that information from. You may wonder how you'll be graded on this assignment. First, you want to check the discussion board rubric. If you are in History 113 or History 114, it can be found under the Course Information tab that's located in the left-hand navigation column of your class's page. If you go to Course Information, you will see another folder that is for the rubrics. Click on that folder and check what your instructor is looking for when they grade your discussion board posts. They will provide a grade based on how well you comprehend the elements of the question, the timeliness of your post, and how you respond to your fellow classmates. Remember that your first post every week will be due by Thursday night at 11:59 p.m. Instructors also check to see how well you engaged with other classmates, your writing, and how well you cited and referenced your materials. So make certain that you look over the discussion board rubric first. One suggestion that I offer to history students each week is that before you begin the week's reading assignment, take the time to visit the discussion board and read the prompt. It's good to have the prompt in mind as you move through the material. Then you can think about exactly how you're going to answer that prompt. The prompt example that I'm using tonight is a discussion board prompt question from History 114. Here's the question that those students have been provided. For your initial post, identify and objectively describe one of the policies meant to promote American industry or foster expansion of the American West. For example, you might discuss a law or policy designed to encourage railroad development or to stimulate industrial development or Western expansion. With this prompt, you've been told what your instructor is looking for in your response. Make certain that you answer the instructor's question. Policies is a key word that you want to take away from this prompt. You want to search for policies that were specifically meant to promote American industry or foster expansion in the American West. You also want to make certain that you're not slipping into writing, for example, about the American South in History 114 this week. Your chapters both covered Reconstruction in the American South and industrialism, but also the expansion of the American West. We're going to make certain that you're not going off topic by talking about the American South, and that you're instead looking toward the American West. Keep this prompt in mind. The first thing you want to do when tackling your discussion board prompt is to cover the basics. For example, we have a sample response of an actual student. This student decided to write about the Homestead Act of 1862. She writes, The Homestead Act of 1862 was designed to encourage the migration of landless families from eastern cities and rural areas to the lands west of the Mississippi River. The legislation was a boon to the citizens and intended citizens who did not take up arms against the government. After an occupation of 5 years, the building of a 12 by 14 residence, and improvements to the land, the government deeded a farm of 160 acres to the citizen for a small administrative fee. As much as the Homestead Act of 1862 benefited the landless citizens of the East, railroads, and industrialists, it punished the Native American tribes of the Midwest and West. After this portion of our opening, the student includes an APA-style in-text citation. In History 113 and History 114 classes, students are permitted to use either APA or Turabian style. It's important to remember, though, that in an upper-level history course, only Turabian style should be used. Instead of in-text citations, Turabian style uses footnotes. If you need guides on how to complete either APA or Turabian style citations and references, or if you need guidance on how to include footnotes in your discussion board posts within Blackboard, please visit our learning community. We keep guides on hand to aid you. It's important that the student has given proper accreditation to where she pulled her answer from. This is good academic practice. It helps her instructor know where she pulled her information from, and it's giving credit where credit is due. Now, what's interesting about what the student has done with the first part of her discussion board response is that she has included a thesis statement at the end of this first paragraph. She writes, "However, as much as the Homestead Act of 1862 benefited the landless citizens of the East, railroads, and industrialists, it punished the Native American tribes of the Midwest and West." How is this her thesis statement? Well, it sets up the argument of her response. A thesis statement is a central argument of either a paper or a discussion board post. It tells the reader where the author is going with her argument, and it also is a statement that must be defended with evidence. That's quite a statement to put out in the middle of a discussion board post. The instructor is going to expect her to explain her position further. So this student is going to have to defend her final statement. Now that she has provided her thesis statement to open this discussion board post, she then provides examples to back up her statement. She goes on to say, "The act was a path for the landless poor of the East to be self-sufficient. Although the homesteaders faced hardships, if they prevailed, they had the opportunity to own land. Ownership of arable land allowed them to escape from dangerous low-paying factory jobs and killing poverty. However, several factors increased the likelihood that the homesteader would face more hardships than anticipated. First, many of the homesteaders did not have all the necessary equipment and livestock to farm, or the money to buy it. Next, speculators purchased choice lands with cash. Finally, the railroad companies owned the most profitable land close to the railroad." Here, she defends the first part of her thesis statement. She concludes it with an in-text citation to demonstrate to her reader where she pulled this information from. Then, she moves on to the second part of her thesis statement, providing more evidence to support her point. The vilest consequence of the Homestead Act of 1862, however, was the forced removal of Native Americans from the land open for homesteading. This removal became an ongoing process as the government of the United States granted land to tribes by treaty and then later forced them from that land. The government also displaced settled, agricultural-based Native Americans who already lived in existing reservations. The result was upheaval and continued distrust of the U.S. government. Here, she provides more supporting details in another in-text citation to demonstrate where she pulled her material from. Now remember, this is an exemplary post. The student has gone above and beyond to provide evidence to support her thesis that she concluded the first paragraph with. But now, she can take it to the next level. This is what wraps up everything in a nice bow. She asks a question. Remember, the point of the discussion board is to get conversation going between you and your classmates. To help the conversation along, you can throw in a question at the end to help other students engage with your post. In this case, the student asked, Reading about this event, I have wondered, how might I have viewed the Homestead Act if I was a settler? How might I have viewed the government's actions if I was a Native American living on a reservation and was displaced once again? What does everyone else think? That question invites other students to engage with her post. And when she asks this question too, it's good for the student to come back and look at the responses of her classmates. Think of how this would appear if you were in a physical classroom with other students. You would talk back and forth between one another about these points. The same is true of the discussion board too. You can talk with other students about these topics. For the final part of her original post, the student then includes a reference. Remember, you can use Turabian or APA style within your paper only if you are in History 113 or 114. And this student has chosen to use APA style. As I noted earlier in our learning community, we provide guides on how to cite e-materials and other sources. You can also double check your references with us at any time. Putting this all together, the student now has a completed post. You may be looking at this and thinking, wow, that is a really long response. Remember though, this is an exemplary post. This is a student who has gone above and beyond, and it does offer you some good lessons for how you can go beyond what is expected to get that exemplary mark. Remember, have a strong introduction that concludes with a central argument, provide evidence to back that argument up, wrap up with a question that brings other students in to engage with your post, and then include proper citations and references so that you're showing where your work came from and that you are giving credit where credit is due. Once your original post is complete, you can turn to completing the discussion board assignment. Remember, you should add 2 responses to others each week. Your first discussion board post should be made by Thursday at 11:59 p.m. However, your responses to 2 others on the board can be made by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. When you're responding to others, go back and read the prompt carefully. Often you're going to find that the response prompt asks you to consider an additional point about the week's materials. You may be asked, for example, to discuss a topic other than the one that you wrote about for your original response. This student who wrote about the Homestead Act may search for a student on the discussion board who instead talked about the Dawes Act. Your responses, too, should be more than an I agree or I disagree response. Tell us why exactly. What did you find to be interesting about that student's post? Bring in new material to add more to the conversation. And when you bring in new material, don't forget to add references and citations to your responses too. I typically recommend that responses be at least 5 solid sentences in length, if not more. More detail can typically put you on better footing, but aim for at least 5 sentences in response. That's going to require you to bring in more detail, to bring in more of what you learned as well. Look for opportunities to expand upon your classmates' posts. And if you're in doubt, ask questions to fellow classmates. Maybe you didn't understand a point within their response and you would like clarification. Or maybe you didn't recall reading about that topic within your e-materials and you'd like to learn more, so you can engage further with that question too. If you have any questions after watching this webinar, I do encourage you to visit our Exploring History Learning community. Feel free to follow our community, post questions, give your thoughts, receive tutoring. After you watch this webinar, why don't you stop by and tell us what you're going to be writing about this week and what you thought the best advice from this webinar was. We look forward to hearing you. Have a great first week in your history class here at SNHU.